this butcher told a couple of them in his room that there was about 4 double bunks in a room, and if one of y'all get that cat, we'll have something to eat. And he said next time that cat come through, some way or another they had something to feed him and get him close to him. And he said that cat stew was delicious. Then was there about, I don't know, a week, and all of a sudden one morning, why, man, there was cannon fire right at the front of the camp. Now we were at the back of the camp from the headquarters. It was a pretty good sized piece of property, and next thing you know, why, the gate to the American compound opened, and a couple of Jeeps come through, and the first Jeep stopped, and there was a little guy there standing up in the Jeep, and he had on a little white helmet, and he had on he wasn't very big, and he had on General Stars, and he had his ivory handle revolvers on each hip, one hand on the windshield, and had the other hand on the ivory handle revolver, and everybody gathered around and was looking, and he cleared his throat. He says, "Well, you boys can go home now." It was General George Patton.
Oh my God.
And I was standing real close to him, could see him real well. And of course, there'd been guys in that camp that they'd been shot down in Africa, and they'd flying P-40s against Rommel, and they'd been in prison like 5 years. They didn't think they were ever going to get out. They'd been transferred from one prison camp to another, and boy, they stand there and they couldn't believe it. Tears just rolled down their face, you know, because they were so emotional. But then he went on to the back fence, and his troops had cut a hole in the back fence, and the guards had all gotten down out of their towers and took off, you know. Of course, this camp had guard towers, just like on Hogan's Heroes, machine guns in the towers, and barbed wire around the top of the fence and all, you know. And they cut a hole in the fence and drove the Jeep on through, and we understood they were chasing German SS troopers through the woods. And General Patton right up front there with them.
Holy cow.
And then that afternoon, we were told that there wouldn't be any transportation until the next day to take us out. And they couldn't get the trucks in there to take us out. No.
I wanted to,
I always wanted a Hemi Cuda.
yeah?
Yeah, with a big 426 Chrysler Hemi in it. You know, they in '71 was last year that they had all of the Chrysler engines in the Cuda. They had the slant 6, and then they had the 318 V8, and they had the 383, and they had the 440, and they had the 426 Hemi. And the 426 Hemi was the big engine that they run all the races with back in those times.
Oh, yeah.
It was really powerful. Chrysler's bringing the Hemi back in 2001, and a 300 Chrysler convertible, I think I saw it in the paper recently.
Really nice car.
Mm-hmm.
Where I wanted to pick up was just before when you were in the prison camp, just before. They opened
Yeah,
the service.
actually, what we talked about last was Patton had come through and told us we could all go home, and they announced that this was in the morning, and about 10:30 or 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And then after he left, they announced that there was no transportation to take us to the airfield to send us back to France. And was a replace a prisoner of war center where they all gathered them all to send them back home. And so they told us we could have the afternoon off, and we could go to town or wherever. Now we walked into town, and there was 3 or 4 of us that were there that was in the 4th Fighter Group with me that I knew, and we walked into town together. And for some reason, we stopped at this building. Is kind of a commercial building, but it was in a residential section. And we went inside. There wasn't anybody in the building, of course, and we went inside and looked around. And on the 2nd floor, there was a storage of grain, like wheat or something like that. And it was just huge pile of it. This room was almost full of it. And we saw something sticking out of the grain, and we walked over and pulled it out, and we found out that grain had all kind of bone china in it: cups, saucers, plates, platters, all kind of stuff in it. And we pulled some of that stuff out and looked at it, and we went on down into the basement, and it was full of brand new machinery and all kind of hand tools, like brand new electric drills and all kind of those types of things. And I don't know why I picked up a big electric drill, and of course over there where they use different power than we do, and it had a big plug-in on it that was 6 inches long and 3 inches wide and over an inch thick, and it was made out of some kind of heavy metal. It felt like lead, and a big cord on it, and that was heavy as a drill. And he had some hatchets there, and I just took that thing and cut the plug-in off. And I don't know why I wanted it, and we had duffel bags, and I took that and put it in my duffel bag along with some other things. And then we came out, and there was a German civilian looking over the fence from his house to there, and he started talking to us, and he wanted to trade us German beer mugs with the cap on top that closed, for cigarettes. And of course, we had cigarettes. I had cigarettes. I didn't smoke, but by now we'd gotten more Red Cross packages, and they always had cigarettes in them. And traded him for a beer mug and so forth, and had a bunch of stuff in this. I don't remember exactly what all it was in this duffel bag that we were carrying. And we'd been issued a duffel bag after General Patton come through. We went back to the prison and stayed there overnight again, just slept in our bunk again, because there wasn't any place else to sleep. And the next morning, the Army showed up with, I don't know, 10 or 20 trucks, and they were these troop carrier trucks with canvas top and seats along the edge. They loaded us all into those and headed out, and we went to the nearest German airfield, which was east of there, but it must have been 75, 100 miles. It was a long ride. And we got to the airfield, and it was 3:30, something like that, in the afternoon. And of course, they just, on one side of the airfield, they unloaded those trucks, and we all stayed in one big group, and we just sat on the ground parallel to the runway out on the field, and there was thousands of prisoners there. Not just one, they from all over had come there, and they were loading them on to C-47 transports. That's like a DC-3 twin-engine civilian transport, and flying them into France. But we didn't get on the flight that afternoon, so we were told that we were going to have to stay there. And while we were waiting, all of a sudden, of course, there was anti-aircraft gun emplacements all around the field and right close to where we were sitting, and there was U.S. Army troops manning these anti-aircraft guns. And all of a sudden, there was some kind of siren rang, and we looked up, and here come a German Focke-Wulf spotter plane. Ju-88 is what it was, going real slow, and he was coming in to land. And he made a pass across the field, and boy, those gunners thought he was coming in to bomb us. They also use those for dive bombers, and coming in to bomb us. And they started shooting at him with those those machine guns and anti-aircraft guns. And man, I mean, shells were bursting. They didn't hit him. He come on around again and come in and landed.
Oh, no.
And he landed on the runway right in front of us. And, he was maybe 30 or 40 yards from us, you know. And he stopped the airplane and cut the engine. And, boy, by the time he did that, there was Army troops there with carbines and submachine guns surrounding that whole airplane. And he stood up and held up his hands and said, "I surrender," and he got down off the wing of the airplane and talked to him, and he'd come there to surrender. He didn't want to fight anymore. He was through fighting. And of course the fighting still wasn't over in East Germany and Czechoslovakia and all that. But anyway, then they told us that after that calmed down a little, well, they told us that we had two choices. There was some hangars and so forth up the other end of the field. We could see in the distance. We'd go up there and see if we could find a place inside to sleep, because it's going to be cool that night. And otherwise, well, we could just sort of go out in the countryside and see if we could find us a place to sleep. So we decided we didn't want to go in the hangars, and the guys from my group, was 3 or 4 of us together. We walked the opposite direction, walked off the field, walked on for a mile or so, and then there was a road leading into a little German village, and what it was just a row of houses on each side of a road. And we got to the sort of the head of it, and there was the burgermeister of the village, the mayor of the village, welcoming everybody. And told us that we would go to the 5th house on the right, and that was the next one, and they were all ready to take these ex-prisoners into their house to let them sleep for the night. And we went to this house, and there was a little German farmer again and his wife, and they were real gracious, and they invited us in, and we looked around the outside too, and we went in, and it was getting time to eat again, and so they offered us the use of their kitchen, and they had eggs too, and they gave us eggs, and we cooked and ate, and they sat at the table with us, and they wanted to learn how to speak English. And they couldn't speak much English. We communicated with them just through motions, you know. And we'd hold up a spoon, and we'd say spoon, and they'd repeat it in German. And then they'd say spoon in English, or a fork, or a plate, or a cup, or whatever. And so then the little German farmer's wife, she took us in their bedroom. They only had one bedroom. And said, "Well, this is where you'll sleep, on our bed." And we said, "No, we don't want to sleep." "Oh, you have to sleep here. This is what you're supposed to do." And so we checked the bed, and boy, I'm telling you what, that thing had a goose down mattress and a goose down comforter to cover up with. And you talk about soft, you just sink right down into that like it was air or something, you know. And she wanted to know, were we going to take our boots off to sleep? And we told her, well, we didn't sleep with our boots on. And we found out that what happened was that when German troops would come through, SS troops or something, why they weren't like we were. They treated them real rough, and they just slept with their boots on, mud and everything on their boots, and right on those goose down quilts and comforters and mattress and everything, and made a great big mess out of it. It was a big job for her to clean it up. Well, the next morning we got up, we had breakfast, and so we still had some Red Cross boxes, and we gave them all the rest of the stuff in the Red Cross boxes. There was instant coffee, and there was all kinds of food in there, and they were so surprised and so thankful. And then one of the guys, the one that fired that submachine gun, Ayers, he had a long GI overcoat. It was full length, and it was just the right size to fit the farmer, and we gave that to the farmer. And he didn't have an overcoat, of course, because it got cold there in the wintertime, and they were so pleased. And when we left, why, there was hugs and tears and everything, you know, and just like you were leaving family. And we walked back the three miles or so back to the airport, and got with our group again. And then they sent the C-47s were landing and taking off all the time, loading up. We loaded on a C-47 and flew to Camp Lucky Strike, France. And this was set up at a French well, I guess you'd call it a state. And the big estate house was the headquarters, but then all the grounds around was just covered with tents, Army tents. And they had folding cots underneath. And and when we got there, well, Colonel Woods, we found out, he went directly up to the headquarters building and talked to the full colonel in charge, and got them to send him back to England to the 4th Fighter Group. And we were a little bit upset about that, because that's what we wanted to do too. Well, we went up there and talked to the colonel, and he said, sorry, no, there's no transportation for junior officers. And we were supposed to sign a registration card that was on each bunk, and so that they could know who was there, and they kept track of us that way. Well, we decided we weren't going to sign in. We were going back to England. So we just left the cards on the bunk, took our duffel bags, and we just walked to the edge of the tented area and walked on out in the fields. There was no guards around or anybody to say anything, hey, where are you going, what you doing? We just walked on, across the fields, and after we got about a mile away, well, these duffel bags started getting kind of heavy with all that junk we had in them. And we come up on this little French farmhouse that, of course, when the armies went through there, why, there wasn't anything left of the farmhouse but the root cellar. And we looked in that, and it was like a basement sort of, but you had to crawl into it. And we crawled in there and pulled our duffel bags in there and stacked them there, and decided we were going to store them there, because we thought that we got back to England, they'd send us back to this Camp Lucky Strike. Well, we walked on further, and we could see a road and trucks going along the road away from the camp toward the coast. And we knew that Le Havre, France was not too far away, 20 miles or something away. And we walked out to this road and flagged one of these trucks down, and asked him where he was going. He said he was going to Le Havre. We asked him could he had a ride. And, sure, jump on. We jumped on this truck, and it was a stake body, big long stake body truck, and we jumped in the back, and he took us right on into the Le Havre airport, and we got off. And there again, they had these tents set up for ex-prisoners and registration forms again, you know, and it's getting along fairly close to dark by now. And we didn't sign in again. Instead, we just went in operations like we owned the place, and got on the telephone and dialed England and got the 4th Fighter Group and talked to one of the squadron commanders, Major Norfield, a Squadron 335 commander, and told him that we need to ride back to Debden in England. And he said, okay, I'll be down in the Nordman Norseman, our little transportation airplane, single engine transportation airplane. And it's the same airplane that they used in Canada for taking fishermen and hunters into the lakes in Canada for years afterwards. And he said, now in the morning, I'm going to be there at 10 o'clock, and you be watching real close. And you know our airplane. Of course, we knew the airplane. Didn't have a whole bunch of them. And he said, when I land that airplane and I turn around, it's not going to be any wind to amount to anything. And when I turn around, you better be there at the end of that runway and get on that airplane, because we're immediately going to take off. Because I don't have any authority to come, and I'm not going to talk to the tower or anybody else there. But you be there. And so next morning, man, we were awake long before then, and we just slept on the bunks in those tents. We didn't sign in again. They didn't know we were there. And there he come at 10 o'clock. When he turned around, we jerked the door open of that airplane, and we all piled in, and it had place for a pilot and a co-pilot, and one of the guys sat in the co-pilot seat that was in his squadron, and those of us sat in the back. And he took off, and we went back to Debden, landed at our home base. And then we weren't officially signed in anywhere, so they didn't know that we were actually, other than there at the base, they knew we were ex-prisoners, but they didn't have any control or orders for us or anything. And so we were free to just, for about a week or 10 days, just to travel around England. And me and another guy, we went all around England. We went to Stratford-on-Avon, Shakespeare's birthplace, and we looked all through the places there that were set up to have sell his books and so forth. And we went to several other towns, and we stayed in little hotels and had English tea and crumpets for breakfast. And finally ended up in London, and then we ended up in a hotel in London that was set up to handle ex-prisoners of war. And then finally they announced that, well, we had to check in because they were going to put us on a ship and send us back to the United States. And we checked in there, and they got us lined up and took us down to a railroad station and put us on a train and sent us to Southampton and put us on another one of those English liners that they used to transport ships with, and we went, troops with, and we went back to New Jersey and at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and we were there for a while, and then they processed us through that and said, well, you have so much leave and you can go home. Now we weren't.
What date was that? About.
It had to be sometime in June, around June the 10th or 15th, something like that.
About 45?
About 45, yeah.
Okay.
And so I went home, and then I went back to Knoxville, and I'd called Marion and went back to Knoxville, and then she come back to Florida with me on the bus, and that's when we stopped and told you about having breakfast in a little Georgia restaurant, and ordered eggs and bacon and toast, and it was served, and the end of the platter was this white stuff. She says, "What's that white stuff? This is not my order." I said, "Yes, it is. That's what they call Georgia ice cream. They serve that whether you order it or not." And it was grits, and she'd never seen grits. She didn't know what it was. and anyway, went back down to Florida, and we went on down to Fort Matanzas, where my Uncle Herman and Aunt Annie had rented the old hotel and had a little houseboat there they stayed on, and we stayed there and went fishing and went across to the old fort across the river and went up in the fort and looked around there, and then we went on back to Knoxville, and then I had to report for active duty pretty soon, and we got married in Knoxville. Now this was on August the 17th of '45 by now, and then I got orders to. I had orders to send me to Texas. What was the name of that town where Eisenhower lived? Denison, Texas, where Eisenhower lived. And there was a little airfield at Denison, Texas, an Army Air Force airfield. And so they had AT-6s there, and I flew the AT-6s, and they also had, I wasn't instructing anyone, but they had Chinese, I think it was, students training there, and boy, they were something else. They bounced those airplanes all over the runway. And while I was there, well, they sent me to a Army airfield in Kansas to take P-47 Thunderbolts out of mothballs and test fly them for before they sent them to the Air National Guard. And I went there and for about a week, and then come back, and then finally I was transferred to headquarters Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. And so we went to Dayton, and then while we were there, I was in administration really. Although I'd got my flying time, and I flew P-51s and P-47s and other airplanes that I was checked out in, and got my flying time every month. I was doing administrative work and working in an office. But the colonel in charge of it one day called me in, and he said, "Well, is there any where you'd like to go? I'll send you wherever." He and I got along real good. Send you wherever you want to go. I said, "I want to go to jet fighter school." He said, "Done." And boy, he issued orders transferring me to jet fighter school, and oh shucks, where was that jet fighter school in Chandler Field, Arizona, and near Mesa, Arizona, and not too far from Tucson.
Yeah.
And they said that the wives couldn't go, and so we went to from Dayton, Ohio to Tennessee, and Marion and Ben Jr. was baby then, and they stayed with her mother and father, and I went on out to Denison. Arizona, and went to jet fighter school, and that was really I really liked it. It was the first time I flew a tricycle gear aircraft. They were flying P-80 Shooting Stars. It was a North American jet fighter, and it was the first jet fighter the Army Air Corps ever had on active status. And there wasn't no two-place. Later on it became known, it was changed, and the fuselage was lengthened and put tandem seats in it. It was known as the T-33 trainer then. And